In every era, there is a need, a spark, an instinct that brings us together to imagine and to innovate. This hasn't changed. What's possible has. We create technology that makes our world better. Ideas that move us, empower, and connect us. But great ideas cannot thrive alone. They need to be shared, challenged, refined. Through our insight and collective curiosity, we advance and grow. New solutions, new directions, new answers. We do that here, together. This is the age of connected intelligence. Welcome to the IQ era.
Good morning and welcome to this session, How Green is Your Bottom Line? It's a pleasure to be here this morning. My name is Stephen Moore. I head up the Climate Action Programme at the GSMA. The GSMA, as you're probably aware, we put on this huge conference, but we're also the Mobile Industry Association, so represent telecoms companies around the world. And you might think, what has climate action got to do with the GSMA? Well, we have an ambition as an industry to be net zero by 2050 at the latest, and that means that we are aligned to limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees. And how do we do this? How do we work with the industry on this? Well, it's mainly through a climate action task force that we set up back in 2019. And we work very closely with telecoms operators through this task force. You can see the list of operators there on the screen. There are around 80 operators represented in this task force from all around the world, covering, I think, almost every country and about 80% of global mobile connections. And what do we do with this task force? Well, we work with them on a number of key issues that are of vital importance to climate action. So energy efficiency obviously is so important for networks, as well as how we power those networks through renewable and low carbon energy. Also, for us as an industry, the majority of our emissions actually sit in the supply chain. So working very closely with suppliers right the way back through the supply chain is so vital to achieving the net zero ambition. Devices are vital, and looking at the circular economy, so aspects like reuse, refurbishment is very important. And every single day, the climate topic expands, reaches new areas of the business, and there's new innovation going on that we need to keep up to date with, as well as continually updating climate science. So there's a lot of capacity building as well that we do, learning and training that we do across the industry. And then transition planning, which is a topic that I'll cover in a little bit more detail as well. So we're seeing this as being very important to help companies actually embed sustainability and climate within their business strategies. So this is kind of how we're working together, and I'll talk a little bit then about how the progress is looking like in terms of network operator carbon emissions. So how are we progressing towards net zero? And we have been looking to measure this ever since we set the ambition back in 2019. And we have been measuring it every single year to understand how carbon emissions are changing from year to year. And there is good news around this in that network carbon emissions have been reducing year on year since 2019. And the latest figures that we have that we published last year were for 2024. We'll be updating those figures and publishing 2025 figures in June, July of this year. What we're seeing is that although progress is happening, and we've seen increasing reductions every single year. So we've gone from about 1 to 2% to about 2.5%, and then the latest figures we had for about 4.5% reduction for 2024. In order for us to be on track for net zero by 2050, we actually need a bigger reduction of about 7.5% per year to 2030. So we need to accelerate already the good progress that's happening across the industry. And we'll dig into actually some of the ways in which we can look to accelerate progress with our excellent panelists that are going to be joining in just a few minutes' time. So this is kind of where we've got up to. But how exactly will we begin to accelerate the excellent progress that we've seen already? Well, I mentioned transition planning as being important to this. And we've actually produced some new industry guidance on transition planning. But what exactly is a transition plan? So a transition plan effectively brings together 3 different areas. One is it explains the ambition that companies have. So this could be around targets and how far and how fast and how deep companies are moving. This can cover not only just the network operations, but back into the supply chain, upstream and downstream as well. The second area, which is obviously so vital, is the action part of it. So how are we implementing climate action projects to achieve those carbon reductions? And where we're not able to implement projects directly, how can we engage with key partners? So for example, through the value chain, across industry, but also our customers and also policymakers in order to help facilitate the changes that we need to see. And then the third area, which is equally important, is accountability. So how are we measuring what we're doing? What are the key metrics that we can put in place to assess performance against this? And then what kind of governance structures could we put in place within organizations as well? Because it's a transition, and that needs to be managed within businesses. And climate is one of those issues that cuts right the way across businesses as well. So that's a bit of the theory, and that's some of the data points, but maybe let's get stuck into how it all works in practice. So I would like to welcome up to the stage our excellent panelists for today. First of all, I'd like to welcome Laura Fernandez. She is Head of Sustainable Finance at Telefónica. Please welcome Laura. Yes, please. Next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Francesca Sartori. Francesca is Head of Environmental and Responsible AI Leadership at Nokia. Next, I'd like to welcome Hans Neff to the stage. He's Senior Director, CTO Group, and Deputy CTO for European and American regions. That's quite a long title, Hans, at ZTE. And then lastly, I'd like to welcome Elaine Smith Gillespie, who is Director at the Carbon Trust. Please welcome Elaine. So thank you for joining us here today. It's an absolute pleasure to sit down with you and talk through. We've heard, I gave a little bit of an overview of how we're progressing as an industry. Some of the things that we've been doing on the GSMA side, many of those things we've actually been doing in collaboration with you as well. And I think it would be useful now to dive into how you're actually implementing some of the theory that I talked about. And maybe I can start with you, Elaine, actually, because you've been working with quite a number of our members and also companies across the industry. And I think you've got really useful insights into how companies are embedding sustainability strategies. So perhaps you can tell us how you've seen that kind of change over recent years and what you're seeing are perhaps some of the latest trends to support some of the action that we need to see across the industry.
Yeah, so in Carbon Trust, we've been working with the whole value chain for many years now, from semiconductors through to telcos and services. And when we look back to, say, 5 years or so, in the immediate post-COVID era, there was a very positive race to the top in terms of a lot of companies committing to very ambitious targets. And a lot of the focus here was, how do we commit to science-based targets? How do we get there? Invariably, there was always a bit of a gap and some uncertainty and acknowledgement of the challenge. But what we've seen in particular the last year, is a realization of the difficulty of the task, let's say, and also some companies understanding and trying to compete with multiple priorities, whether they're driven by geopolitics or economics. And we're seeing a real maturing of how companies are addressing this right now. And so there certainly has been, I'd say in the last year, I wouldn't say a swing back of the pendulum, but an acknowledgement of the difficulties. But now I am seeing, and I think we're seeing, a bit of an inflection in which I'm talking overall. There are varieties and there's variances across geographies and types of companies, but an inflection in that companies are maturing and understanding that climate actually, and dealing with climate, is good for business. It's very important for the bottom line, for competitiveness, for the top line as well. And so what you were mentioning earlier on about companies trying to grapple with this by having a effective and a coherent plan, a climate transition plan, defining the business case. We're seeing a lot of that happening, and a real quantification of the benefits. Importantly, companies internally have to put in the effort to sell this to the senior management, to sell it to investors. So that's a lot of that is happening now. We're also seeing bringing into focus the solutions and pathways towards where organizations need to go to, and the innovations that are there. So that's a very positive trend. And lastly, there is also a growing momentum and collaboration across the value chain. No single company can do this on their own. As you were saying earlier on, the carbon is being driven at each stage of the value chain, from semiconductors, big hotspot, equipment and electronics. So everyone is understanding how they need to work together, and the forums like GSMA and others are starting to accelerate that, which is a really positive thing to see.
Yeah, thanks, Alain. Perhaps we can just pick up on that point that you made around the business benefits and the tangible business benefits of it. And perhaps, Laura, I can come to you, because as Telefonica is a obviously leading mobile and fixed line telecom operator, and you have been implementing, I understand, quite a lot of different projects to support greening infrastructure. So it would be great to find out from you and from your experience, what have you learnt in terms of the tangible business benefits of actually doing what some people see as perhaps more cost or marketing exercises? Perhaps you can bring some of the detail and depth to this.
I'll try to do that. So first of all, my main message for anything, what you saw, Stephen, before, everything that we saw, so this amazing improve that we've done as a sector in the last years, that just happens when your environmental and climate strategy is strictly stick to your business model. So we are not talking here of having to select, so we do sustainability or we don't do sustainability, or how they compete. What this shows is that sustainable transformation is an ally of competitiveness, and it has always been. Maybe now we have to take the time to bring this message to the table, because before we didn't need it, because we were talking about how to improve in terms of climate change, of targets, of sustainability, but there is nothing to pick here. If you define the appropriate targets along the way for your company, you're gonna do it exactly with the transformation of your business model, right? So how we've done in the past and how we have managed to reduce, in our case, but you also have similar pathways for sure, is that we have done a lot of modernization of infrastructure. So we have done a network transformation, and we have here some equipment manufacturers. So that's part of the big targets of the sector. We've done a network infrastructure transformation. We've talked a lot in Europe and outside Europe about how switching off what we call legacy infrastructure and going with new technologies, how that gets an energy efficiency, how that gets an improvement, and how that also allows us at the same time to provide all the data needs that us as consumers also have. So we have done all the way a lot of different measurements. Like, to do that, you need to optimize all the technologies. We have optimized 4G. We have deployed a lot of 5G. We have compacting a lot of buildings. So just in Spain, for example, we have managed to close around 2,000 buildings because of these improvements of the technologies. We are trying to put less equipment working with a much more performance, each one of them. Again, I have here my colleagues from the equipment manufacturing side. We have worked with power-saving features. So the new networks are very well prepared to attach the energy consumption to the low, medium, or high needs or traffic every single hour, every single day, depending on the geography, depending on if we're in a city or if we're in a village. We have worked a lot, of course, with all types of modernization of equipments, not just the main ones within the network, but anything that you can imagine, external cabinets, electrifiers, so anything that has a new technology in place that reduces and promotes energy efficiency, we have done that. And of course, we have tried to reduce energy fuel consumption, not just because of reducing costs and also emissions, but also to increase dependency, which is nowadays quite relevant, and a bunch of different measures. But to give you a particular data that can be very significant in the case of Telefonica about how these improvements year over year also turns into savings. This year, 2025, with all these measures in place, we have reported a rate of 29 megabytes hour per petabyte. So depending on the traffic, that's the cost that we have had in terms of energy. Last year, just 1 year, last year in 2024, we have 38 megabyte hour per petabyte. Depending on the energy markets that you deal with on a daily basis, that savings is going to change a lot depending on the geographical footprint that you have. But it's a huge ratio, and we have improved that since 2015 in 92%. So that's megabyte hour per petabyte. That's the main savings that you're going to have, and that's where you also have the business model of transformation of networks.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate you going into the detail around that. Yeah, Hans, please.
I would like to get a small add-on to this, and you see this as a perfect sample and role model of sustainability, and more operators tend to see the full life cycle TCO if they do an RFP. So if you look back, let's say before 2020, it was a product RFP. You get a product, you get features, you get a price. Now we talk about sustainability. We talk about, okay, how to recycle the product. How is the energy on it? How is the energy on the customer consumption? Is it having features which helps me to save energy? So more and more operators, as you also, think about how this product, this new generation of innovation helps to raise and to come to aims to reduce the total end-to-end power consumption and go back in the circular economy to say, okay, how do you dismantle this then? How do you recycle it then? Will you refurbish it? So it's really the full set what we can see more and more coming.
Yeah, thanks, Hans. Brings me very nicely onto my next question that I was going to ask, actually, and maybe actually, Francesca, I would like to know, in terms of what Nokia is finding from its customers, in terms of sustainability requirements. Is it everything really focused on energy efficiency, or as Hans was mentioning there, are you also seeing a much kind of wider set of requirements from your customers?
Absolutely, is wider than energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is the tip of the iceberg, right? Yeah. Was the trigger happened because the energy cost skyrocketed a few years ago. Yeah. But then after that, the awareness of the overall, let's say, wider scope of sustainability has become quite popular. So energy efficiency is given. So no one is going to doubt. But that, built on what he said, is becoming cross all over the product, all over the domains, fixed the transport, core, data center. You cannot have, I have a sustainability product, the fixed product. It doesn't work like that. So it should be really embedded in any single product decision, in any single rollout, in any single domain, because everything is going to converge to give a better solutions, right? It's not, you cannot cherry pick it. You cannot say, I want to have better reliability and energy efficiency, but I don't care about life cycle assessment. No, you need to have the full package.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what we are doing. We do not have, even in our here booth, a demo on sustainability. We have sustainability across everything, that every single algorithms or predictability AI, or I don't know, even rollout service is aimed to address this scope.
Yeah.
If you want to think about an example, if you want to have, it's not only energy, it's also if you send 5 people for having a site visit, you have 5 people traveling to that site visit. You may optimize this, right? You may have only 1 person instead of 5. You may have 1 visit instead of 3, because maybe you have your digital twins. So you are able to remotely assess the site quality, the site status, which hardware do you have. Of course, the latest hardware may have the QR code that you can read, but maybe you have 20 years old hardware, so maybe you need to have a visual language model that is able to extract the information just watching, maybe because a drone is able to do digital twins. And everything is aiming to reduce carbon emission, energy consumptions, and then optimize the hardware, so better life cycle assessment, less hardware, less, and then you see, it's everything going on the same directions.
Yeah.
So
yes.
this
must
is
be an end-to-end scope at the end.
absolutely.
And also going on predictive, as you described before. So it's not just reactive services, it's also predictive
anticipating. If I know that there is a congestion going to happen, then I may optimize my resources in order to deal with this congestion, because the congestion has 2 major side effects. Okay, you reduce the performance, you have the customer unhappy, right? So you need maybe do a very, as I say, no forecastable actions, so you may not optimize your recovery plan. It takes longer. And then, of course, every time you need to shut down and reboot the hardware or the whatever equipment, it's wasting energy. Right? So if you know that the congestion may happen, you may have something like the possibility to reallocate the resources in order to deal with this congestion, have a very fast recovery, and then reallocate the resources properly on the network. So this predictability helps the resiliency, reliability, is everything going again toward a bigger sustainability scope.
Yeah, thanks, Francesca. That's really useful. And perhaps picking up on the point that you made as well just before around sustainability really being embedded across how you think about the way that you do things by design.
By design.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, I think, because I wander around MWC every year and kind of try and get a sense of like what is on the stands and what are the general trends. And 2 or 3 years ago, everything was about sustainability. Green, green, green was kind of everywhere. And you don't see that so much actually this year. But it sounds like it's not that it's not there. It's just it's been embedded.
Included.
And perhaps, Hans, we could come to you actually on this point, because I know ZTE has got some very ambitious climate targets, and based in China, and there's a lot of green innovation coming out of China. So perhaps I could just ask you a little bit about what you're doing from a company in terms of having embedded sustainability and environmental, and perhaps some of the business benefits you're seeing from that.
Oh, where to start? In principle, picking up on you, end-to-end sustainability was, as you mentioned before, on MWC very omnipresent. Every booth had it. And meanwhile, it's an embedded system. So what does sustainability mean in general? So it's just my perspective. Everybody is welcome to correct it. From the first design, from the first architectural point, you try to envision what this is used for and how you can make it better, more efficient, more sustainable, to fulfill the requirements of the service. This goes end-to-end. This goes on the mobile phone, this goes on the product of the radio, this goes on the transport, this goes on the core, and it goes on the orchestration, which becomes more and more important. One example, for example, is the AI native data center. It's one of the aspects which now becomes more and more interesting for industry, because intelligence should help us to reduce energy consumption, should it help us to make it more sustainable. Now, the first aspect is, please don't use AI everywhere. Exactly. Use AI where it benefits you. Use AI where you have value from it. Use AI where it, let's say, is a useful tool. Because, to be honest, you can do automation where you don't need AI, and it would fulfill 98% of your needs. And maybe AI just, for some aspects, just 2%. For other aspects, 95%. So it depends on the use case you want to apply to. And going now to an AI-native data center, and there it's specifically important to consider from the start of the design to the final deployment how to do it. Why? A classical data center, you put servers, you put switches, you turn it on, it processes on 30–40% load, stable, and is happy. An AI data center is totally different. The load fluctuates, the heat has to be adapted, the cooling has to be adapted, the energy flow has to be adapted to real-time orchestration needs. So this is called co-design. Co-design means that your process, how GPUs are connected to each other, your process, how your large language model is embedded, your process on how your system works as one sum makes the difference on 100% GPU, CPU utilization and 8–10% efficiency or 99. So it's really from the bottom of the design, from the orchestration, from the usage, from the CPU, GPU, hardware, to software, to intelligence, straight through to be implemented.
Yeah, understood. I wanted to touch on one of the topics I mentioned at the beginning, which is around this, the concept of the circular economy.
Yep.
So moving away from having things that we just take out of the ground, we kind of make into something and then we throw away, improving kind of reuse, repair, effectively extending the lifetime of things. And network equipment is an interesting one around that. And I think there's some push in some respects to extend the lifetime of network equipment. And I wondered like how that sits, maybe Francesca, if I could come to you, whether you see that as a challenge to your business model around extending lifetime equipment, and therefore perhaps...
Okay, the first challenge is we now have, just for a few months, a metrics and the methodology to measure how much you are circular, let's say like that, right? All the metrics and the methodology we have been using to measure the quality of the network has been borrowed from other standards. Think about millisecond is based on second. Is a methodology to measure the time, right? Kilogram in hardware, a kilogram is taken from another methodology. And if I ask you, okay, how much your network is circular? You don't know. Your 20% could be different than his 20% if you have a normative, a global standard that allows us to have the same way to assess this. This is one of the major weak points of the overall discussion because we do not have yet a global understanding. We just achieve a consent in ITUT to have this methodology, so we adopt the delirium economy metrics to introduce the circular economy. Now, the big steps is to take this circular economy metrics and implement in all the processes to make sure that from our design, supply chain, our third parties, the people that are implementing the network, wherever, all really across the ecosystem, we're using the same methodology so we can claim the same numbers. We do not have a greenwash, right? And we are able a fair comparison. That is one of the, let's say, the point that we need to face quite soon. Otherwise, all the numbers we are going to share, it's subjective in a way, right? That is something that we need to make sure that we need to face. And it's not a challenge, it's an evolution and a path toward the final equilibrium.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up actually measurement and what the right metrics to use, because it's something that sort of touched upon earlier on in some of the data points. And I wanted to ask actually Elaine, what you're seeing from your point of view in terms of perhaps an evolution of metrics, perhaps thinking about transition plans as well that companies are now publishing. Are there new metrics that you're seeing as part of that? What companies using? Are they evolving? Francesca seems to suggest that we're sort of in a process of evolution around this.
Yeah. There's certainly a big evolution in terms of metrics and disclosure. We've been having quite a discussion of all the detail of the things you could measure, and what we're seeing is both an evolution at the corporate level in terms of metrics and disclosure, and also at the products and services corresponding to what you want to communicate to customers and what customers are asking for in the value chain. So at the corporate level, before it was carbon emissions, there's some qualitative disclosure and communication of climate-related risks. But now we're seeing at the corporate level a lot more sophistication in terms of quantifying the financial risks and benefits around climate. And I think that's very positive because that really helps to inform investors, key stakeholders, and helps drive the corporate agenda in terms of action. So that's a really important area. We're also looking at more disclosure of, we're just talking about circularity, for instance. So circularity is an interesting one. I completely relate to the fact that saying that this is 30% circular does not mean much. You have to ground it in actually, you do need to have a taxonomy or nomenclature, like whether it's repaired or refurbished or resold. That's really important. But we've been working with telcos on helping to define what those metrics should be at the corporate level. I think what's really important both externally and internally in the circularity area, because it is so important to decarbonizing, especially scope 3, is also tying that financially as well. And I think that response, so you could say, well, we drove X amount of revenue by selling a circular model, for example. I think that really raises it up to the agenda internally and externally, helps to sell that. What we're also seeing is more and more sharing of data within the value chain as well. There's been a lot of lack of visibility in the past around what's happening up in the supply chain, in the semiconductor space, in the component space. So there's a mix of industry-level organizations defining standards and requirements, working with each other, increasing requirements, and where sort of industry groups are then talking as an industry to the next industry group upstream and saying, look guys, we need to solve this. So we're seeing a lot of that. There's a lot of work being done by the semiconductor industry, a lot of work being done by the telco sector as well with engaging with that. So that's very positive. That's sort of like, in a sense, under the hood, work that needs to be done. Where then that becomes visible and is really important is to then just share that as part of a product footprint or a service footprint. And from a B2B perspective, there's a lot of demand there. We're seeing a lot of customers upstream saying, we're doing this because our customers are asking us to do this. And of course, it's incredibly complex. We're trying to sell a service that has AI in there and some components and all that, sort of actually figure out what is the actual footprint of this. It does require, and AI can help as well to do that, but we're seeing a lot more of that, which is very positive. So more sophistication, more granularity, and more demand is what we're looking at.
And picking up on the financial aspect of this, and Laura, I'd love to come to you on this because your title is Head of Sustainable Finance. So perhaps you could, yeah, exactly. What is that? What is sustainable finance? Maybe like, what is sustainable finance as relevant to the telecom industry, and kind of where is this heading, sustainable finance?
I'm going to try to split it in two main areas of impact, let's say, where we work, but also where I think it can be useful to link it to the conversation. The first one that is the most common one is sustainable financing, right? Okay. So we are not conceived by a general investor as one of the main sectors that they would try to look for or ask about when they think about green labeling financial instruments, right? So this has changed a little bit in the last years, but not so many years, because we issued our first, what we call a green bond. Yeah. We issued it like in 2019, and by that time was the first one, so we needed to generate an awareness. So what happens with sustainable financing is that all these projects that I mentioned before, all these projects that my colleague mentioned, that we can stick to an improvement in terms of decarbonization, of energy efficiency. If we are able to allocate that CapEx, that's the amount of investment, we call it green CapEx, not we, this has a bunch of SPOs, audits, whatever, but let's say we can allocate that CapEx. We say this is the green CapEx that, in my case, Telefonica is going to invest in the coming years to do the transformation of the networks to a more decarbonized network, or digital solutions, depending on the activity that we want to ask for the money. And that's where investors can make the decision of including or not the environmental or social, when it comes to social criteria, when they decide investing on Telefonica or on the ICT sector, right? So this is the main issue. We are going to the market and we are generating the awareness, hey, we can do the most greenest possible deployment or network, or we can go with a conventional issuance because it's not to get environmental improvements, let's say. That's one of the main goals. That's where, in the case of Europe, in fact, Sustainable Finance Package has developed a lot of regulation in the last years. Like the main regulation here, and Alain mentioned that before, is the taxonomy, where we have a list of activities that can be listed as sustainable or non-sustainable. Apart from that, one of the last movements in the last years, and where this comes from, and how we can measure all these that we mentioned, and how we quantify that in euros, is what we call the link between sustainability and financial statements, right? So how much of all these projects that we do, how much of these savings in climate, in circular economy, water, in biodiversity, whatever you are much more, wherever are your material issues, how much you quantify that. Again, for the European issuers or companies, it's a bit easier because we have CSRD in place and somehow mandates us to start doing that interlinkage. But it's quite good for the sector, it's quite good for the future because it allows us to start giving real quantified methodology-based data. So in our case, for example, we have reported how much is the investment that we've done in 2025 for the green energy transformation, around 1.9 billion. How much is the circular economy revenues that we have had based on this taxonomy, around 1.8 billion. And it starts generating all the data that we need to put in place to say, okay, this is about reducing decarbonization, generating new models of circular economy, but how much can we quantify that? This is the interlinkages, and that's why sustainable finance has something to say.
Yeah, thank you, Lara. Thanks you for the explanation. Yeah, that much clearer, much clearer. And obviously, you know, we're in a sector where it's constantly innovating. Networks are evolving. And you know, we're already talking about the next generation of networks, the 6th generation. And Francesca, I wanted to, so I know this is a particular area of focus for you. So I wanted to understand, do you see competing requirements for this next generation? I think there's a lot of, people expect it to do a lot of different things. Everything.
Everything.
You could, you know, sustainability, resilience.
Yeah.
Performance. I mean, you could probably name others, but can you just tell us how you see that, how you see them all working together? Is it going to be, are there going to have to be some significant trade-offs? Are we going to be able to do everything?
We need to, basically, let's say, before talking about technologies, we may need to have a mindset shift. Because so far we've been, let's say, moving from 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, giving higher and more performing network. That was the trigger. You buy a new generation network because it's faster, because the latency is better, because the uplink, downlink, really technical driven quality. With the 6G, and the question is another generation, oh my God, why we need to have, we have still the 5G, we're still allowed the 5G. And this why was one of the major points when we designed the 6G concept, to say, not another generation, should be having different principles, a different trigger. And two major are sustainability by design and security by design. Because 6G will going to happen the next decade. Don't think about 6G now. See, we are writing the specification as we speak, right? And we go up to 2029. So 6G is not happening this decade, happening the next decade when you show that the SBTI target, right? We have a target, a net zero target by 2040, many countries or many companies by 2050. So 6G will be one instrumental tool, let's call it the systems, in order to achieve that target. If we deployed a system, fantastic, a super cool super cool system, but increase the carbon emission, doesn't have a proper hardware recycling or modularity, use amount of money, energy because of AI everywhere, right? I don't know if really everybody will be keen to deploy this system, even though it's a fantastic system from technology point of view. So the criteria are going to change because we are going to have in a decade where we need to do the major steps in order to achieve the net zero target. So 6G embeds this sustainability by design in different principles on different energy consumption and carbon emission reduction in all the different steps. we have a proper AI for run, a run for AI in order to select properly where AI can bring the value, all the hardware efficiency. So we are thinking about a software-defined radio, software upgrade, software where hardware can be modularity, absolutely modular, so you can change some portion, upgrade some portion without or involving the full network element, for example. We are absolutely going to the resiliency. And then the resiliency is not only for the 6G or the telco per se, but it will be intertwined with the resiliency from AI system and the energy grid, okay, together. Otherwise, it will be one of these fails, or the overall cast of fails. And last but not least, the value to the society. So a kind of a shared prosperity, right? Make sure that we reduce the unliteracy that we are creating, because some countries are much more on digitalization, and then we have the big gap between other countries that try to recover the same level. If we introduce another generation that exaggerates these gaps, it's not for the society. So we need to we are going to have a system that is going to cover the rural area, the not served area, without killing or the business plan, right? Because now we do not cover in the place because there is no a business case properly done. So we need, for example, to have a connectivity with satellite, that you don't need another extra phone. Try to reuse the 5G phone on 6G phone in a way that you are able to generation on the same. We change some principles in the 6G on top of course, the better performance. That is part of this, let's say, step 0. But what else is 6G on the next generation is also keep in mind which will be the scenarios that we have in 10, 15 years in terms of sustainability, and don't forget the cybersecurity.
Yeah.
Still part of the job.
Very important. Yeah, Hans, I was going to also ask you whether, is it a similar vision that ZTE see, the one that Francesca's just laid out?
We are very much in line. So the very simple thing is security by design, absolutely. Sustainability by design, no question about that. The products should be more and more sustainable, more and more efficient. And one aspect what I see on 6G specifically is fulfilling a promise 5G not 100% did, is connecting everything and making it simple. So openness by design. So helping the industry, helping the society, helping basically to be more sustainable, to be more connected, more interactive, more integrated. I see there a big step on 6G too to follow up there. Number one, bringing connectivity everywhere is one aspect, but also having the simplicity to use the connectivity and to integrate the connectivity easier, specifically on enterprise markets, industry markets, campuses.
Yeah. Thanks, Hans. I wanted to, because we're just approaching the end of our panel discussion, but I wanted to round off because we can't be blind to the kind of wider geopolitical winds that are swirling around at the moment, particularly as it relates to climate and pushback, shall we say, against climate action. So I wanted to understand, because we've got this as a bit of a headwind. At the same time, as I mentioned in some of the data I presented at the beginning, we need a tailwind. We need to accelerate rather than be slowed down. Elaine, maybe I can come to you first, because I'd love to understand from your point of view what you think are some of the short-term things that we can do to accelerate despite some of the challenges that we're seeing. Short-term things that we can do to accelerate climate action across the industry.
Yeah. I think in the short term, there's a lot of technology that's there, a lot of solutions that are there. So I think bringing those together, matching the solution providers with those that have the challenges and bringing the finance to do it is one of the quickest ways of starting to tackle that. And that needs to be really backed up by really communicating what the business case is for doing these things. And that's just absolutely essential. So there is a lot of effort and improvement in the way these are being developed. How do you create a business case to make sure that it integrates the future view of how you're de-risking things, for example, for yourself as an organization, really reflecting the financial benefits and costs in an effective way. So getting the business case right, getting that buy-in, and using that to actually drive investment in the solutions that are there now, I think is one of the most important things you can do in the short term. Then kind of long term, that starts creating a virtuous circle, and then what we want to then see is also collaboration increasingly across the value chain. So I think that's happening now. I'm really seeing a lot of important momentum there. But that kind of collective effort also needs to happen, not just a corporate level effort.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Elaine. And Hans, from your point of view, what do you see as kind of bright spots? What are the things that we can lean into in the near term to really push things forward and try and hit that accelerated reduction?
Accelerating it, honestly speaking, is one learning. I start different, I'm sorry. One learning I had over the past years is understanding the gaps, understanding the situation for each operator is different, and helping the operators to consult which action benefits best. It is the way forward that not one shoe fits all and one solution fits everybody. But generally, we are thankfully CDBA rated now for the 3rd year, so this is the suggestion we do. In a production, to be as efficient as possible from design. Using those products to the most efficiency at the customer side and helping basically to show what those products can help the customer in sustainability, but also in bringing new features and functions, and also integrating an openness that it can be easily offered for the society, for the customers to benefit from them. So this end-to-end approach, not only end-to-end in the network, but also towards the society, I see as the most valuable step forward.
Thanks, Hans. Francesca, how about you?
I can add on this the holistic view. So not only see a pieces of action. Of course, each single pieces make a pieces of the puzzle, right? But we should see sustainability like a puzzle. And we need to pay attention to each single pieces. Some are really visible immediately. Others you need to play a little bit with because the shape are a little bit different. But that is the major point. So in each single role, each single function in the company, each single collaboration across ecosystem need to converge on the same goals. Alone, we cannot do anything.
Fantastic. Right? Thanks, Francesca. And Laura, what do you see from your point of view, from Telefónica's point of view? How are you going to be driving things forward over the next few years?
I'm gonna say, to be quick, so totally we need to converge, but for us the main issues where we are on a daily basis working a lot is scope 3. Yeah. And this circular economy model that we can promote, of course, and this interlinkages between sustainability and financial statements, I would say.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, that's been an excellent discussion. I really appreciate us digging into some of the business benefits and hopefully presenting a positive view on some aspects of sustainability, which perhaps people see as being just a cost or something that people are just doing on the surface. But I think we've really dug down to see how it goes much more beneath that. So please could you thank our panelists. And if you'd like to find out more about what's happening across the industry related to sustainability and climate action, feel free to check out our website, gsma.com. gsma.com/climate is where you can find lots of examples from all of you, as well as other examples across the industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you.